Hi, everybody. Welcome to our first Authenticated Virtual Summit of 2022. My name is Andrew Shikiar. I'm the Executive Director and CMO at FIDO Alliance. And we're here today to talk about the imperative for modern strong authentication in commerce. Commerce and payments have always been a vertical focus for FIDO Alliance. It's one that helps push our use cases and also one where we've seen early and very dynamic adoption. So I'm going to kick things off today by sharing FIDO's high-level perspectives on things, and then I'll get out of the way so that you can hear from the many expert speakers that we've assembled for today's program. Financial services and payments have always been a target for hackers, and the pandemic over the past few years has only accelerated this. We've seen over 230% growth in attacks when the pandemic first happened. That trend has not ceased in the 2+ years there's been this pandemic. The average cost is nearly $20 million per attack. And you can see all sorts of added data points here about how targeted the financial services sector is and the damages therein. And the fact of the matter is, I could probably spend the entire 15 minutes today going through slide after slide after slide with data like this. And so this is very much the problem statement that we're aware of and that many of you are aware of as well, and that we simply need to work together to solve. The core issue, of course, is that we depend on passwords. Passwords are the ubiquitous form of authentication on the web today, but they're simply not fit for purpose for today's networked economy or yesterday's, really. As a user, we all understand that they're clumsy, they're hard to remember, they're hard to enter on small devices, but the real problem is that they're easy to phish, they're easy to harvest and replay, and that's really where the internet breaks down. That's what causes data breaches, and that's what FIDO Alliance is trying to solve. Any form of second-factor authentication, including SMS and OTPs, adds security, but they're not really convenient. And they are still phishable, most important. In fact, let's look at exactly how this works, right? So historically, when you go to log into a website, there's a user who goes to authenticate over the cloud by entering a shared secret. You enter a password. If it's accurate, you're granted access to that site. But all of a sudden, a hacker comes into play, right? And so let's talk about a machine in the middle or man in the middle attack, where a hacker pretends to be that bank you're trying to log into. To the user, it looks exactly like the bank.com website. A well-designed phishing attack will have a dynamic copy of the contents, a similar looking URL. And so to the average user, it's not discernible as a phishing attack. And so the user then goes to enter her password into this what she thinks is a site, and the machine in the middle or the man in the middle simply relays that over to the bank. And then presto, to the banks, from the bank's perspective, it looks like the actual user, they're granted access. The problem is it's not the user, it's the machine in the middle. Now, something that's very important to note here is, as you see up top here, we're talking about username, password, and OTP. To the hacker, to the remote attacker, there's really no difference between an OTP and a password. The only real difference is that a password is more persistent, whereas an OTP is a short-lived, one-time passcode or a dynamic passcode. But in the time that the user relays the information to the machine in the middle, that's still a very live passcode that can be used to take over that account, which happens with a growing frequency these days. In fact, we're on record, and I'm on record saying that MFA bypass attacks, using legacy MFA, will be a recurring headline throughout 2022. And so ultimately, we need to make a fundamental shift from this kind of legacy form of credentialing, which is using things that to a more modern form of multi-factor authentication and user authentication, which relies more on what you have and what you possess, right? So from things that that are in your head, that are typically stored on a server, including passwords, SMS, OTP, knowledge-based authentication at the initial onset of your account creation, and things like that, which are secrets, quote unquote secrets, that really are not secret anymore, to things that are literally in your hand. So like an on-device biometric or a local biometric or a PIN. So basically, to the user, what they do to unlock their device is now what they can do to log in. Beyond authentication, we have to look at using possession-based means for account creation, stronger DocAuth methodologies and things like that to allow for not just more foolproof account creation, but also down the road for account recovery. The fundamental difference, of course, is that knowledge-based authentication, knowledge-based credentialing, these legacy forms are susceptible to common threats, whereas modern MFA is truly phishing resistant and built for today and tomorrow's society. And this, of course, has really been FIDO Alliance's focus since day one. Our goal has been to find that sweet spot in usability and security that will allow strong authentication to grow at scale. All right, so FIDO at our core, what we do is we create open standards for asymmetric public key cryptography. Public key cryptography in and of itself is not new, right? But what making it usable is new. And strong authentication is not new, but again, making it usable is new. There's a long list of highly secure technologies that have not scaled to be consumer grade, and that's where FIDO is really looking to change things, and that's what the Alliance is working on together. Let's very briefly look at how FIDO works so we understand the fundamentals of what we're doing with FIDO authentication. So going back to our dialogue, historically, again, the user logs into a website through a shared secret. What FIDO is doing fundamentally is introducing the concept of an authenticator to essentially mediate this authentication process. The authenticator is both a thing and a concept. And instead of the user logging into the site, the authenticator basically does that for them. The authenticator rests on one device, or it is a device. And the authenticator, most importantly, holds a private key. A public key, corresponding public key, sits on the server. To activate the private key, if you will, the user must verify herself to that authenticator. And the verification can happen, will happen through a single gesture, whether that's a biometric or a PIN or a security key touch. And then once that verification has happened, whether it's in enrollment or at point of authentication, a challenge response dialogue happens between the public key and the private key, between the authenticator and the server, that must uniquely match to allow the authentication to be granted. So that's a very high level look at things, but it's this dialogue here that's very unique and that stymies the remote attacker. So looking at this in a little bit more detail, this is so important to understand how FIDO protects users. So imagine, again, there's a machine in the middle of the user and the bank. So in the FIDO world, there's now a challenge coming from the bank to the user. The user, instead of entering a password, will verify herself to the device and to the authenticator. The authenticator then goes to send the encrypted signal back to the bank. But now the man in the middle, or the machine in the middle, can't actually relay that, right? Because the machine in the middle does not know the user's authentication private key. And likewise, the whole system breaks down. I mean, fundamentally, the core thing you need to understand here is that the machine in the middle cannot get in the middle of the dialogue between the authenticator and the server, between the private key and the public key. And so this is how FIDO protects against man-in-the-middle attacks, and this is how we're stopping phishing at scale. So there's a large list of companies who support this vision and who've helped build this technology. FIDO was launched in 2013. We've grown to have over 250 members worldwide. The companies you see here on this slide, this represents our board of directors. It's obviously a very impressive set of logos of 40-something companies, but what I think is so important about it are the types of companies we have in the Alliance. Really, everyone that we'd want to have sitting around the table trying to solve the password problem is literally sitting around the table. We have companies that make the devices that we use every day. We have experts in security and biometrics. And perhaps most important, we have the service providers whose businesses are dependent on FIDO being successful, also taking part in the Alliance, bringing their use cases in, and then working collaboratively with all the members to build our specifications and all of FIDO's outputs. In addition to the companies you see here on the board, we have sponsor members who help build out our working groups. We have associate members who help build out the FIDO certified ecosystem. We have government members who bring in regulatory requirements and their own use cases. And we also liaise with other .orgs and NGOs to address adjacent use cases and vertical markets. So all in all, there's a very broad global movement behind FIDO Alliance. When we look at financial services, I think there's three key things that FIDO can help solve. Fundamentally, we need to protect online accounts, right? We need to stop data breaches at scale. We need to stop account takeovers. And FIDO does that through our approach to user-friendly, unphishable user authentication. Secondly, it needs to be simpler. It's interesting, as the years have gone on, our conversations about deploying FIDO have gone from, very security-conscious, security-centric, technical-centric dialogues into more and more conversation about usability. Because ultimately, if you're an e-commerce provider or a bank, you want, to have a positive user experience associated with your brand. You want your users to be able to log in, to make that purchase, to open that account, and to have a good customer experience. So creating simpler sign-in experiences is important as well. In fact, we've invested a fair amount of time and money into this. Last year, we released UX guidelines for how to deploy FIDO for platform authenticators, and we'll be doing more work like that moving forward. And the third key thing that we're focused on is helping companies comply with regulation and making secure open banking a reality. I think it's fair to say that open banking has really been hugely disruptive in not just the e-commerce space, but also on the regulatory side, right? Especially for those in Europe who've had to grapple with SCA and how to meet those requirements. We think that FIDO provides a very elegant and simple solution that will allow for customers to have secure commerce flows while also helping merchants and banks comply with emerging and current regulations. So for all of you, you'll spend the rest of today learning about different aspects of FIDO authentication. But let me summarize what I see as your opportunity, right? If you are a merchant or an e-commerce provider or any sort of relying party, your opportunity is to leverage the fact that FIDO is basically present on every modern device, right? So FIDO is built into Windows Hello, it's built into the iOS and Mac operating systems, it's built into Android, every leading browser. So literally every device being unboxed right now most likely supports FIDO authentication. So your opportunity is to actually tap into that to provide more secure login experiences to your customers while also protecting your own enterprise. Earlier this month, FIDO Alliance was very excited to release an important paper that outlined the next steps in the evolution of FIDO and passwordless authentication adoption. Specifically, we introduced the concept of multi-device FIDO credentials that will help address current challenges with account recovery for consumer deployments at scale. As I've outlined, as I think you'll hear more about, FIDO has been very successful in changing the nature of authentication. We're built into every leading device and browser, and many services already support FIDO logins for their users. However, the challenge has remained that users still need to enroll their FIDO credentials for each service on each new device, which typically requires a password for that first sign-in. So to the user, the question is, what happens to your FIDO login credentials if you get a new device or you lose your device? The fact of the matter is they're not recoverable in today's FIDO model, which presents challenges both to the user, but also to the RP. Because to recover those credentials, you typically need to use a password, which helps the password persist on the server. So this hurts not just user experience, but it also keeps relying parties from moving towards a passwordless future. So we'll be providing more details over the next couple of months on exactly how this will work. But at a high level, you can imagine a password manager-like experience for the user where they rely on the operating system to essentially sync their credentials across their operating system devices. And this allows us to shift from a model where every service fends for themselves with their own password-based authentication system to allowing RPs to rely on the higher security of platforms' authentication mechanisms. It's important to note that this is not a requirement. So if you are an RP and you have requirements for a device-bound credential, you can still support that, whether you want that to be a platform authenticator or a security key. What we're simply doing is outlining a vision which will expand the options for RPs to leverage multi-device FIDO credentials. So we're looking forward to sharing more details about this over the next couple of months, as we do think this will change the nature of passwordless authentication at scale. I talked earlier about the fact that you have an opportunity to tap into the 4 billion plus devices that support FIDO authentication. There are a number of companies that have already deployed FIDO at scale. You can join this growing list of trailblazers. Intuit has deployed this with great effect. eBay, we often cite eBay. eBay has been one of the most prolific adopters of using web authentication to provide passwordless logins for their users worldwide. Likewise, there are many companies and payments and financial services who are using FIDO. This is a subset. And then, of course, beyond payments and commerce, FIDO can address a wide array of use cases. We have seen FIDO deployments across use cases, across borders, and really anyone who's trying to secure their users access to online services can do so more effectively using FIDO. FIDO Alliance as a body is happy to provide a number of resources to the industry and to our members. Three key things here. First of all, we'll continue to evolve our authentication and identity specifications. So our work's not complete. New use cases emerge. We'll continue to evolve our specs to meet those use cases. Secondly, we talked briefly about this, but we want to help you improve your customer experience. Right? So authentication needn't just be secure, it must be easy as well. We're investing again in UX guidelines. You'll see more from FIDO Alliance on this throughout 2022. Significantly, we've actually launched a UX committee within our board of directors. This includes design and UX experts from some of the world's biggest brands collaborating on UX systems that will be fed into FIDO's development processes. And last but not least, we'll provide you resources to help you be more successful. We have an array of white papers on our website. We have webinars, videos, and things like that on demand to help you understand the ins and outs of FIDO authentication and your best path moving forward to deploying FIDO to your constituents. So before I step off, I want to just share the lineup for our summits. We're very aware that commerce trends vary depending on where you live, particularly between Europe and North America. And that's actually why we have some variance between the two programs. Also, we wanted to bring you not just one, but two expert speakers as keynotes, one from each side of the pond. But of course, both Susie and Alan have global perspectives as well, which they'll be sharing in their keynote presentations. If there's something airing on the day that you're not attending, fear not. All of our sessions will be available on demand following day 2. So with that, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. I hope you get a lot out of today's sessions. If you have any questions, you can always contact us via email at info@fidoalliance.org. Thank you very much.